I still remember that day like it was yesterday. The excitement of leaving work early, grabbing flowers on the way home. So I thought I'd surprise Sabrina. Maybe we'd have a quiet moment before picking up the kids from daycare. The house was too quiet when I walked in. No TV, no music, just silence. And then I heard it. A muffled laugh coming from upstairs. Our bedroom. My feet felt like lead as I climbed those stairs. Each step was an eternity, my mind racing, trying to explain away what I knew in my gut was happening. I pushed open the door and there they were. Sabrina and some guy I'd never seen before tangled in our sheets, our bed. Where we'd made love, conceived our children. The world stopped. I couldn't breathe. Sabrina's eyes met mine, wide with shock, and was that guilt, or just surprise at being caught? I don't remember much after that. There was yelling, crying. The other man scrambled out, barely dressed. Sabrina kept saying it was a mistake, that it would never happen again. She begged me not to leave, to think of Liam and Chloe. God, the kids, they were so young, barely more than babies. How could I tear their world apart? So I stayed, but I made it crystal clear to Sabrina, I'm staying for them, not for us. Something broke that day, something I'm not sure could ever be fixed. I never thought I'd become this person, cold, distant, a shell of the man I once was. But here I am, going through the motions of a life I no longer recognize. After that first betrayal, something inside me died. I stayed for Liam and Chloe, but the love I had for Sabrina withered away, leaving nothing but a bitter aftertaste. Every morning, I'd wake up next to her, feeling like a stranger in my own bed. The warmth that once filled our home had been replaced by an icy silence. I threw myself into work and fatherhood. It was easier to focus on spreadsheets and little league games than to confront the emptiness in my marriage. For Liam and Chloe became my world, my reason for trudging through each day. I watched them grow, pride swelling in my chest, only to have it deflate when I caught Sabrina's eye across the dinner table. The years crawled by, each one harder than the last. I noticed the signs, the late nights, the hushed phone calls, the sudden work trips, but I didn't confront her. What was the point? Our marriage was already a sham, held together by the thinnest threads of obligation and routine. I remember the night I realized Sabrina was having another affair. It was Chloe's piano recital. I sat in the audience, beaming as my little girl's fingers danced across the keys. But the seat next to me was empty. Sabrina had texted some flimsy excuse about a last-minute showing. As I watched Chloe's face fall when she scanned the crowd and didn't see her mother, something inside me hardened even further. From that moment on, I became a master of indifference. Sabrina's comings and goings barely registered. I'd hear her car pull into the driveway. At 2 a.m. smell the unfamiliar cling to her clothes, and feel nothing. It was as if I'd built a wall around my heart, and she was on the other side. Liam and Chloe, they were my lifeline. I poured all the love I had left into them. Weekend camping trips, helping with homework, cheering at every game and recital. I wanted them to have at least one parent they could rely on, even if our family was falling apart at the seams. As the kids got older, I could see the toll our dysfunctional marriage was taking on them. So Liam became more withdrawn, his eyes holding a wisdom beyond his years. Chloe, always so sensitive, seemed to shrink into herself. I wanted to shield them from it all. But how do you protect your children from a broken home when you're the one keeping it broken? Sabrina's arrogance grew with each passing year. She'd barely bother to hide her affairs anymore, as if daring me to confront her. But I never did. I'd watch her primp for a girl's night out, knowing full well she was meeting some nameless man in a hotel across town. So the old me would have raged, demanded answers, fought for our marriage. But that man was long gone, replaced by this hollow version who simply nodded and went back to helping Chloe with her science project. I became a ghost in my own life, going through the motions but never truly living. To wake up, go to work. Come home, be a father, sleep, repeat. It was a cycle of quiet desperation, punctuated by moments of joy with my children that made the rest of it bearable. There were nights when the weight of it all would crush me. I'd sit in my home office long after everyone had gone to bed, a glass of whiskey in hand, wondering how I'd ended up here. How had the love of my life become this stranger who shared my house but not my heart? How had I let myself become this cold, distant man who accepted betrayal as the norm? But then morning would come, and with it the familiar routine. I'd push down the ache, steel myself for another day of pretending. For Liam and Chloe, I told myself, always for them. As Sabrina's behavior became more brazen, I found myself withdrawing even further. I'd stay late at the office, hit the gym, anything to avoid coming home to the emptiness that awaited me there. Our conversations, when we had them, were stilted and superficial. We'd become experts at dancing around the elephant in the room, maintaining a facade of normalcy for the kids' sake. I watched as Sabrina flaunted her freedom, taking advantage of my silence. She'd come home with shopping bags full of new clothes, perfumes I'd never smelled on her before. Once I found a hotel key card in the laundry. I simply placed it on her nightstand without a word. The Marcus of old would have exploded, demanded answers. But this version of me, he just added it to the mountain of betrayals he'd learned to ignore. For life for the kids, it was all for them. That's what I told myself for years. Every bone in my body screamed to just leave, pack up my stuff and walk out, but there was always that little voice in the back of my mind that said, stay. Stay for Liam, stay for Chloe. They didn't need to know how fucked up everything really was. And for a while I convinced myself the act was good enough. The routine we fell into was clinical. Mechanical. I go to work, spend the day in my office, drill through emails, deadlines, meetings. If I was lucky, there'd be a few moments to catch my breath between it all. Physically moving kept the rest from swirling around my head too much, which was fine. Because once I walked through the door at home, a different Marcus took over. The father Marcus. The doting one. The guy who kept it all together, made sure the fridge stayed full, and the bills were paid, and no one noticed the gaping wound that sat between me and Sabrina. See, I'll give us credit, we got good at it. On the surface, you couldn't spot a crack. Any distance between us was chalked up to busy schedules. Your dad works hard because he loves us, Sabrina had said once, throwing one of her fake smiles in my direction. So I had to laugh internally at how quickly that lie slipped out of her mouth. She was probably the busy one. Photo ops with her realtor friends, charity dinners, drinks out with whoever fit her next new mood. But whatever. The kids didn't need to know. I didn't care. And for a while, they didn't ask questions. I was there, though. Every game, every practice, hell, even every post-game recap. Liam was always so sure on the court, had this way of analyzing the game in real time, seeing moves a few steps ahead of the players. I think part of that was Liam trying to shut out the mess, focusing on what he could control. So I saw the kid grow, not just physically, but in a way that pushed him deeper away from his mother. She wasn't nearly as present, and she had an excuse for everything. Ran late with clients, had to attend an urgent open house. Truth was, she hardly even knew what Liam's foul shot percentage was. Chloe was quieter, a little more reserved than Liam, but that didn't mean I was any less involved. Dance recitals, Christmas shows, I was right there, front row to see her spin across the stage. She had her mother's grace, no denying that. But the difference, she didn't have Sabrina's cold detachment. She was still sweet, still open in a way that scared me sometimes because I knew how dangerous the world was beyond our doors. How badly people like her mom could destroy that softness. Except, you know what? They never saw us fight, not even once. I don't know why. Or maybe Sabrina just didn't want to make a scene in front of someone she couldn't manipulate. No yelling. No throwing dishes or slamming doors, conversations which endangered species. At most, a handful of words passed between us daily. Like we cut out any indulgence of small talk or pleasantries. More business transaction than marriage. But the lie held, as far as the kids knew, their dad was just busy. Their mom, well, they were starting to connect the dots there. Slowly. It was funny in a miserable way, watching as everything started slipping so damn predictably. Sabrina wasn't even trying anymore. By the time Liam was a senior and Chloe had just started high school, she was barely coming home at a reasonable hour. I could hear her making excuses under her breath that sounded piss poor, even to her. I stopped asking. Stopped caring. So the funny thing was, some nights I hardly slept next to her. Sometimes I'd be up at 2 a.m., staring at the ceiling in the dark while she crawled into bed next to me, like nothing was out of the ordinary. The smell, though. Goddamn cologne sticking to her like a brand. Some bold new scent she didn't even bother to hide. He had to let it fester because what was the point? It'd just be deja vu from the first time I caught her all those years ago, only now I didn't have toddlers I needed to tuck into bed. I worked late most nights, maybe even later than I needed to, just to stay out of the house. Sabrina was still out doing whatever the hell she wanted, so no worries there. Plus, I hit the gym harder than I had in years. Needed to burn off the energy somehow. Because God help me, I wasn't spending it fighting over someone who had checked out of this marriage long before I emotionally pulled the plug. She just didn't know it. I think what got to me the most, though, was how she walked around so confident, so damn sure of herself, like I'd never do anything about it, breezing through her days, texting God knows who at the dinner table while Chloe is telling us about a history project. Sabrina never panicked when I came home late or didn't ask her where I disappeared to on weekends. There was no sense of a woman trying to keep her home together. It was entitlement at worst because she had built herself this delusion that I'd always fall back. I was here, but I bid my time. Watched how long it'd take before the cracks spread far enough for the whole wall to come down. One night, though, I got home around 8 p.m., had been buried with meetings and emails all day. Liam was upstairs studying. Chloe was doodling quietly at the dining table. I noticed Sabrina wasn't home. It wasn't the first time she'd been out late, but tonight something about it just hit different. She breezed in around midnight, slipping casually through the door like she came right from another life, the faint scent of someone else following her, lingering. I couldn't help but wonder whose damn cologne it was this time. So that was it though, wasn't it? That's when the thin thread holding everything together unraveled. Nothing grand, nothing dramatic, just a distant, hollow realization. This needs to end. No more pretending. The kids were older now, smarter. I didn't have the shield of they're too young to understand anymore. Hell, Liam probably knew more than I gave him credit for. And Chloe, I saw in the way she looked at me now, with those soft, sad eyes that asked questions she wouldn't voice. She didn't need the words. Neither of them did. We were all past the point of explaining anything. It became about surviving the last part. Then came the call. Liam called my cell. Midday, completely out of the blue. His voice was tense, like he was trying to keep it together. Liam wasn't the type to overreact. Hell, the kid had a better poker face than I did most days. That's why his tone made my gut drop. Dad, you need to come home. Now. That was it. No more. No explanation. Just this quiet, stoic urgency, like he was holding back something big and ugly. I didn't even hesitate. Dropped the pen from my hand. Told Sharon to hold my calls, grab my keys. I didn't know why my stomach twisted into knots. But Liam's voice had that effect. The kind of tightness you only hear when something's cracked wide open. I was on the highway before my mind even caught up with me. I raced past rows of traffic, weaving through lanes like the car could ease whatever dread was building in my chest. The whole way, nothing made sense. Why the urgency? A car accident? Something with Chloe? Sabrina? As I turned into our driveway, I noticed Sabrina's car parked already. Odd, but Liam was standing at the doorstep, alone, arms crossed, shoulders squared. He didn't move when I pulled in, and whatever I was about to face inside, I knew the wall markers, the one the kids didn't see, was about to disappear. I don't know why my hands felt like they were trembling when I grabbed the doorknob. Some gut feeling, something primal maybe made my whole body tense. I could hear that distinct noise upstairs. Not loud, but unmistakable. A rhythmic creak that I knew all too well. My mouth went dry as I started up the stairs. Each step felt like it was dragging me closer to something I didn't want to acknowledge, even though a part of me already knew. It's like some grotesque déjà vu. I'd been here before, over a decade ago, when Sabrina's first betrayal had ripped me open. Funny, you'd think after all these years, after all her episodes, I'd be numb to it. But no. That same fucking chill went down my spine, only this time it wasn't tinged with shock or disbelief. Just fury. This deep, coiled rage that had been buried under layers for the kids, and it'll be different this time. Maybe I'd let her get away with it longer than I should have. But tonight wasn't going to end like the others. The door. Slightly ajar, like some sick invitation. One more step, and I could already see the scene unfolding on the other side. Sabrina, stark naked under those sheets that smelled like home, like nothing good at this point, panting, but not alone. You'd think she'd have the decency to look guilty, or even remotely apologetic. But no. Her eyes glanced my way like I was an inconvenience. Like I was in her way. Just another person interrupting her moment. Just wait till we're done, she said, barely even acknowledging that I'd walked in. Like she was asking me to put something on the grocery list. Casual. Thoughtless. Inhuman. Two men. Strangers. Fumbling together like this was just another fun night out. And not the fucking destruction of everything I'd been holding together for the last 10 years. At first I just stood there. Not thinking, not processing. I don't think I even blinked. So I've pictured this moment in my head before. How it would go down. But nothing I'd imagined scratched the surface of how raw it was in reality. It happened fast after that. Like something inside of me snapped and everything I'd swallowed just lit on fire. Get the fuck out of my house, I roared, and it wasn't just my voice filling the room. It felt like something was tearing itself apart inside me, something wronged for far too long. The two of them, those guys, God, they took off like scared rats, scrambling for their clothes, avoiding my gaze, their actions jerky, chaotic, pathetic. Even. The bedroom door smacked the wall as they fled, not looking back once. They knew they weren't wanted. Hell, they knew they didn't belong. But Sabrina, she didn't move, didn't flinch. Just sat there wrapped in sheets, her face barely registering any emotion at all. "Marcus, why are you so surprised?" She had the nerve to ask, lounging there like some spoiled queen inconvenienced by a servant. So I didn't answer right away because my mind was trying to keep up with her sheer audacity. Years of resentment sucked into this vortex that was our marriage, and there she was, still convinced she was in control. Like years of her doing this shit hadn't finally pushed me to the edge. She rolled her eyes as if I was the unreasonable one, the one overreacting. "We've been pretending for years, you don't care." Her tone, dripping with condescension, cold, dismissive, as if none of this ever mattered, as if all those times I stayed were worth nothing. Staring at her, I wondered where the hell the woman I once loved had gone. Or maybe I was a fool all along. I opened my mouth but closed it just as fast. I couldn't trust myself to speak without everything spilling out once. Never agreed to this. Sabrina's incredulity made me want to grab something, throw something, do something, preferably vulgar and explosive. But outrage, that blinding rage, wasn't worth giving her more satisfaction. Sabrina would feed off that. "So we've been living a lie for years. I thought you didn't care anymore." She shrugged as if this was some matter-of-fact business transaction. I just stared. My pulse pounded in my temples. I couldn't tell if my breathing was shallow or if I'd stopped altogether. That's the shit she'd convinced herself of, that I just didn't care anymore. She'd twisted everything, hadn't she? Twisted it to make herself feel like the hero in her unwarped story. And then the words that left my mouth weren't ones I'd planned, but they needed to be said. I stayed for the kids. Cold, detached, no emotion, just truth, like I was delivering the final verdict to a question she'd been too arrogant or blind to see. But I never agreed to this. There was silence. For the first time in what felt like years, Sabrina stayed quiet, the weight of my words hanging in the air. But even now, her body language screamed indifference. Like this was still more of an inconvenience than her ultimate undoing. "You said you were staying for the kids, Marcus," she finally said in response, again reverting to that same calm, that relaxed demeanor, as if to reason me out of my anger like it was some foolish tantrum. "So why are you acting like this?" I clenched my fists, knuckles white, and held back from whatever I half wanted to yell back. I wasn't even going to give her the satisfaction of entertaining that question. She really didn't think she was wrong. That's the thing. She believed this was allowed because, in her twisted logic, we stopped being something real, and this gave her license for all the bullshit. Maybe it was that realization, that she was still completely convinced she'd done nothing wrong. That did it for me. A decade of this silent agreement to live a life that no longer resembled what I'd wanted for myself, for our kids, came crashing down. I'd thought of leaving before. Many times had daydreamed. Even, hell, I'd imagined this savior complex of staying to keep things from crumbling for the kids. But at that moment, I didn't give a fuck anymore. "So we're done, Sabrina." The words flew out clean. Final. And I meant every syllable. That was it. No more considerations, no more compromises. Enough of this charade. She blinked, thrown for the first time. She was genuinely speechless. She hadn't once thought this day would come. Pua, sitting at the conference table, surrounded by stacks of legal papers and the droning hum of fluorescent lights, I gripped the edge of my chair until my knuckles turned white. The courtroom prep had been intense, but it was nothing compared to how my stomach twisted as the actual trial began. I had never imagined I'd end up here, fighting for the right to keep my kids away from Sabrina, a woman I'd once loved more than anything. But that part of me had died long ago. Whatever remained had just been about the kids. It always was. It didn't take long for Sabrina to paint me as the villain. Her attorney leaned into this smooth narrative about how I had checked out, how I had emotionally abandoned her long before she ever strayed. They tried to make it seem like she hadn't had a choice, that turning to other men was her only escape from the cold, distant life I'd boxed her into. I could almost hear the artificial pity creeping into her lawyer's voice, the rehearsed lines about how she tried. Right, she tried all right, just not in any way that actually mattered. I was staring at her as the words swirled in the courtroom, thinking how well this act fit her, always able to play the victim, no matter how twisted and warped the truth was. I fought to keep my face blank, but inside I was seething. This was the woman who'd invited strange men into our home, the very walls where our kids had grown up. The same house where Liam and Chloe were supposed to feel safe. Knowing they'd seen, with their own eyes, the crumbling mess she and I had tried to keep hidden behind closed doors still made me sick. But here she was, acting as if this was just some emotional misunderstanding, throwing blame at it that erased everything she'd done. And then Liam! When he walked up to the stand, his shoulders squared but his face tight, God, you could see how much it hurt him to be there. He didn't flinch, though. Not once did his voice waver. He was quietly resolute, every word sharp because it cut him to say it aloud. He admitted that he'd known about her affairs for years. Sabrina must not have realized just how much Liam had seen, or she didn't care. The way he looked at her, after telling the court what he knew, it was the final nail in the coffin. He told them how he'd caught her, over and over, how he stayed quiet because he didn't want to destroy the family. Watching him carry that weight, standing before the judge, a goddamned high school kid who should have been worrying about things like getting into college or whatever teenage stuff. But instead, he had to sit here in a courtroom testify against his mother. It felt like a gut punch, knowing that I had let this boil over for so long. He shouldn't have had to shoulder any of it. When it was Chloe's turn, all 15 years of her, looking so out of place there with her small, timid frame, I almost stopped breathing, so I wasn't sure she could go through with it. But she surprised me. When they asked her how she felt, how she had been affected, Chloe's voice was steady, though soft, as she told the judge how Sabrina's actions had torn everything apart. But it didn't take loud words to make an impact. It was how quietly heartbreaking they were that made it clear how deeply trust had been shattered. So I knew it wasn't easy for either of them, sitting there and spilling their truth like that, especially with Sabrina glaring at every word. She still couldn't believe they had the audacity to turn against her. In her mind, they should have been on her side because she's their mother. So that's how she always thought. Like relations or claims of love could erase whatever ever ugliness she brought down on us. After that, Sabrina's case unraveled fast. The evidence wasn't just piling up, it was burying her. Her delusion crumbled in real time. She tried to twist it, still playing the game as if she could walk away untouched. I think she expected me to intervene, to soften the blow like I always had before. But I had made my peace with what needed to be done long before we got to this point. I wasn't saving her, not anymore. For the ruling came down swift and merciless. Full custody to me. She had tarnished everything so fully, so deeply, that the judge cut her from any claim on or our assets. She had nothing left to stand on. There wasn't even a flicker of remorse in her eyes. She still didn't get it, still trying to figure out how it all slipped through her fingers. She thought she was untouchable, but the smugness she wore for years finally cracked. I didn't even feel joy when I heard the ruling. Just relief, like a weight being lifted off my chest after years of pretending to breathe with it there. I turned to look at Liam and Chloe. They were sitting together in the back, both staring straight ahead, faces taut. Somewhere in their eyes, underneath the exhaustion and worn-down expressions, I saw a glimmer of that same weight falling away from them. All three of us had been trapped, but now there might just be a way out. As Sabrina shuffled out of the courtroom, alone, it was like watching a stranger walk away. She seemed smaller now, diminished, as if the years of betrayal had finally caught up with her in those few short moments. And she didn't look back at me, which felt right because I wasn't waiting for her. For the first time in years, I didn't feel tied down, but there was no longer a marriage to maintain or a broken woman to save. I could breathe again, without worrying about what came next. We didn't stick around long after the verdict. Chloe quietly clung to me as we walked to the car, and Liam kept a protective distance just behind us, still watching over everyone as he always had. Sabrina disappeared into whatever mess remained of her life, but I wasn't concerned about that anymore. My focus was on them.